Okay. 1 second. Okay. Go live.
Are we live, Stephanie?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I will go ahead and call our town council meeting to order. And the first item is the approval of the minutes of our August 4th town council meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Do we have any changes, edits, comments?
No, Mayor.
None?
None.
All right. Then all in favor?
Aye.
All right. The minutes are adopted. Mayor's update. I've got just a few things I want to bring either the council up to speed on, or in some cases, I know council's up to speed on these items, but I want to make sure if anybody's watching that we communicate them. A couple things. One, today is the first day to file as a candidate for the town's December 1st election. And I always want to point out to, particularly if there are any new residents on the island, that I want to stress that our election is on December 1st, not on the first Tuesday of November. I know occasionally people get confused because it is different that we're a month delayed, but ours is on the first Tuesday of December. The filing starts today, so if anybody is interested in filing as a candidate for the town's election, they may do that from today through noon on October 2nd. And they file that with Patra. They can get our town clerk. They can get whatever documents that they need to do that. And just as a reminder, the town election is for both the mayor and 4 council seats. Although in a moment when we get to the next item on this business on the agenda here, obviously we've got some changes being considered that will affect or potentially affect that race. So I just want to again make sure everybody knows that the filing opened today for those elections. Second thing for council, I just want to bring you up to date on. You may recall that back in June we talked about sea level rise, and particularly we had a discussion about how we start to move this forward to sort of the next level of putting some structure around our priorities and Kika's and other parts of the community. And we talked about and agreed to a recommendation around an adaptive management approach. And you may also remember that as part of that, the first stage was to have a group of volunteers in the community that would be working with us and with the community association to start with developing a survey so we could actually get some resident property owner input into the whole issue of sea level rise, better understand what their concerns might be. And I just want to bring you up to date that group has been working very, very hard. Lucas Hernandez, as you know, with the Community Association, along with a significant group of other individuals, have been meeting. They have held several focus groups online, but focus groups to try to get some community input and build what ultimately will be a community-wide survey. And as I said, they've been working hard. They've made a lot of progress. And at the moment, at least the last timeline I saw, that they expect that survey should be ready sometime this month, mid-month, that it would go out to our property owners. So hopefully we will see that. And if you recall, our target was to have that completed so that the town council could see the results of that by our November meeting. So that appears to be more than on schedule, and I want to both bring you all up to date, but thank them for all their work on this. I also want to just bring up to speed, I think all the council members know that there is a proposal that has been put forth to the Charleston County Planning Commission for a rezoning request to develop the property next door to the town hall. The intention, my understanding is still that the intended use of that property would be to use it for a miniature golf facility. The developer held a sort of I don't want to say an impromptu, but an informal meeting about a week ago on the actual site to answer questions that people in the surrounding community might have. My understanding is there were very few from Kiowa, a few people from Seabrook, but most of the attendees were probably from the surrounding Charleston County, Betsy Carson area. There is, in fact, now a planning committee workshop that is scheduled where the County Planning Commission will talk about and have an initial review of the proposal. My understanding, it is not an event where they will actually be approving or voting on it. Stephanie, you correct me if I'm wrong. Even though, I want to stress that this property is not in Kiowa. So obviously we don't control it. It is not us that they are asking for the rezoning from. We are going to communicate though, because we know that a number of our residents might have an interest in the use of that property. And in fact, I know they do, and I know that some will want to weigh in on that. So at on our normal bi-monthly e-blast, I think this week, Stephanie, is that when it comes out?
Tomorrow.
Yeah. We will be communicating to our residents the timeline, when the planning committee is going to meet, what they need to do if they want to provide any comments to the planning committee for the county. We're also going to ask them again, even though it's not an issue that we control, we are going to ask that if any of our Kiowa residents do provide any comments to the county, that if they would copy us, I would really appreciate that. It would help, I think, myself and the rest of the council members have a better understanding of to what extent our residents have any issues, either in any views on these, either for or against that use of the property. So that is coming up in the next week or so. I also want to bring you up just real quickly, although it would take a long time to go into all of the discussion, but as you all know, there has been an awful lot of activity taking place the last few weeks with respect to SGAs and the town's concerns about the prevalence of the past prevalence anyway of SGAs in our environment, and obviously the impact on bobcats. As you're aware, this has, and I'm glad, it's picked up a lot of local interest over the last couple of weeks. I know we've had news stories picked up by all of the local networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. The Post and Courier has picked up and also done a story on it. The communications have been going out to the community, trying to, again, explain and educate around the issues. I think we're starting to get a good response on our Bobcat pledge, both from residents, from property managers. All of our major entities, I believe, have now signed on. A number of certainly a number of the larger pest control companies have signed on to the pledge and are showing significant support for the effort. Certainly we don't have all of the companies yet, and I think we know that for this to be successful, we're going to need to have all of the pest control companies support us, but we've gotten very good support so far. We also have had discussions again in the last week both with Clemson University, also with the South Carolina Pest Control organization, again, to talk about what we're trying to accomplish, how they can help us. I also just want to point out that Senator Chip Campson, who is our state senator, has especially been a very strong proponent and supporter of our efforts. He has involved himself both in communicating with Clemson, communicating with the Pest Control Association. He and I had a Zoom call last week with both of those entities. And he has certainly provided his personal support to the effort. And then finally, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have more we can talk about, but Jim Jordan has been working closely with Clemson on a research project that we may be able to get going fairly quickly, which would help us really start to do some work on the island to better understand the extent to which SGAs are in our ecosystem. This would involve us over time actually trapping other kinds of rodents and or other animals on the island, testing and trying to build a better understanding of the extent to which we have these in the ecosystem, where they are, if we can better understand what the sources may be, and so on. So this is going to be a long effort. I mean, this is not an issue that we are going to solve overnight. I think it's going to take a lot of work in terms of communicating, educating, getting support from the industry. But my sense is right now that, you know, while we would all like to have fixed this overnight, that I think we're on track. I think we're making really good progress. But there's a lot to be done. So hopefully we'll have, you know, some more positive things to report and comment on certainly over the next few weeks. Stephanie, did I miss anything else on SGAs?
No, Stephanie.
I didn't mean to catch you as you were getting ready to drink your tea. So
Sorry. No, you haven't. Stephanie, B, did you miss anything? I think you covered it well in terms of providing an update.
Yes, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
all right, and let's see. The only see if I have anything else. The only other thing I have that I just wanted to comment on, I've never really used the mayor's corner to talk about residents who have passed on the island, and I don't know that any of the council members, except possibly I know Chris, knew Jack Reagan, who passed away over the weekend. But I want to point this out only because Jack was an important part of the town. Jack was both a member of the Public Safety Committee for a number of years, and was one of our very strong contributors to the town in the public safety arena. But Jack was also one of the co-founders of the town's CERT team. Probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 8 years or so, he and others brought forth the idea to both the community association and the town at that time for the need, and really argued for and was the key person in bringing the CERT team about. So I just wanted to make that comment and certainly point out all of the strong things he did for the town, and give our best to his wife Carol and his family. So that's all I have. With that, we're going to move to old business, and the first thing is to consider approval of ordinance 2020-8. Move some papers around. So ordinance 2020-8, this is a second reading, and this is an ordinance to amend Article 2, General Government Administration, Chapter 2, Municipal Code. When we first discussed this last month, we recognized that we wanted to use the opportunity in between the first and second reading to make sure that we got input from the community, that we had, took that time to make sure that there weren't any concerns or questions or issues in the community around making this change in our terms from 2 years to 4 years. Personally, the thing I was most concerned about is, I want to make sure that in November or in December, we have a smooth election. I didn't want to, because we're doing this or potentially doing this just a couple months before the election, have any unintended consequences where potentially any individuals who were seriously considering running for a town a seat on either as mayor or town council backed out of doing that because of the change. So I do want to make sure that we talk through this, understand if any of you all have heard any concerns or issues. I will tell you that from my perspective in the last month, I've not received any public, really any public comment, with one exception that I'll raise in just a second. I've not heard any public objections or concerns about this. I've not gotten, again, except for the one I'll comment on, any emails or comments. I've had informal discussions with any individuals who have talked to me about possibly running, and all of them have indicated that they are fine with and understand the reasons for moving to 4-year terms and would be supportive of it. I obviously can't know those people who have not yet, who might come forward in the next month and want to run. But at least at this point, my sense is that that there does not seem to be any objections to moving forward with this that would inadvertently negatively impact the upcoming election this coming December. Have you all similarly gotten any comment or heard of any concerns that we need to be aware of?
I'll comment. I haven't heard concerns, Craig. Actually, several people who I have talked to about the issue understand completely the need for a better bridge to continuity, which is the reason for this change. And two of them said to me they do also understand that most people who choose to serve on council do it often for 2 terms at a time. So 4 years doesn't seem to be a big stumbling block in the mind of most people. And they see the upside as being continuity, which they do think is important for the town. So generally speaking, no negatives, and if anything, some positives.
The one I do was I alluded that there were some comments. The comments that I did get were a couple two emails, and both of those were they were supportive of the change. The discussion was purely around the timing and whether we should be making the change, but making it effective to a future election, make it effective to the 2022 election rather than the 2020. But it wasn't unsupportive of moving from 2 to 4 year terms. And I think, I think the concerns were valid ones, but at least from my own perspective, in light of the feedback that I've gotten from potential candidates, it seems to me that waiting till 2022 doesn't seem to be necessary from my own standpoint. So, well, let me do this. Let's go ahead and so we can get this into order here, so we can open for discussion. Do I have a motion to approve ordinance 2020-08 on second reading?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Okay. Since I have a motion, a second, let's go ahead and open it up for discussion then. And Dan, I don't want to put you on the spot, but the one area that we have had, I think in the last month, some discussion is whether the approach that was recommended in the first reading which was that in the transition, in the transition year, you got to work your way through in that year which two positions take the 4-year terms and which two take the 2-year terms. And in the ordinance as it was proposed and passed on first reading, the approach is that it was to be based upon the order of votes, so that the highest 2 vote getters would take the 4-year, the next 2 vote getters would take the 2-year. There is an alternative approach that was discussed briefly that other municipalities have used, in which we would actually run separate elections. In other words, candidates would either file to be a candidate for a 4-year term, or they would file to be a candidate for a 2-year term, and voters would then vote separately. They would vote for the candidates separately for 4 years versus those for 2. And I know that there has been some discussion raised both among council members and also among non-council members about whether that might in fact be a smoother and better way of making this transition, and one that would result in better alignment between both the desires of candidates and the terms that they prevail in having. And Dan, since, if you don't mind, I guess I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of take that discussion.
Yeah, if I may. Thank you, Mr. I do think there maybe are some advantages to amending this to actually set out the fact that the election would be for 2 posts that would serve 4 years and 2 posts that would serve 2 years, for several reasons. One of which is if there are some new candidates, and we certainly have heard of a couple, and there probably are more. The ones that have talked to us are anxious to serve and may prefer to serve a 4-year term. And this would allow them to then run exactly for a 4-year term. Also, they have a slight disadvantage if it's simply run as, let's call it, if you get more votes, you serve it 4 years. Anybody who is new to council or running for the first time may simply not be as well known as someone who's an incumbent. And to be fair, that's a little unfair in this situation, especially on Kiowa, because the vote differences among people who are running for council tend to be minor. There tend to be very few differences in the number of votes. So in fairness to the people who might be new, if you're interested in doing it, you're aware of the 4-year situation, it may be your preference. On the other side of it, there may be people on council today who have already served 2 years, maybe longer, would like to serve again, and might prefer the 2-year term. So I think, in fairness to really all of the candidates, I would prefer to see this amended to the point where we have 2 openings for 2-year terms and 2 openings for 4. This is actually the only time that would happen, because in subsequent elections, starting in 2 years, all of the council members would be serving for a period of 4 years. So everybody just becomes a 4-year person. So I actually think there are several advantages to doing it that way.
And I just want to, and then I'd like to turn over and get comment from everybody, but I just want to highlight also one of the comments that Dan made. Obviously, I have no idea this year. None of us know whether the election for the 4 council members will turn out to be what I call a contested election, more candidates than there are seats, or whether it will not be. But I've gone back and looked at the vote counts for, going back several years. And particularly what you tend to find is in years in which it is a relatively uncontested election, meaning there's 4 seats and 4 candidates, then the vote differences between some of the candidates could be, there might be 20 vote difference between the top candidate and the 4th candidate. And so that's it, I think, as Dan points out, isn't really necessarily a great way to make the determination on who's sitting on a 4-year term or a 2-year term. If it's a contested election, then sometimes you do see big differences. So let me open it up to everybody else. Comment, thought?
I have a question. In the documentation we received on the proposed change in the language, it said that there would actually be 2 elections. I don't understand what that means.
Well, it doesn't mean 2 different, it means that on the ballot, they would show up differently. So
Right,
right now, the way you would see the ballot is you would see person vote for mayor, and it would have, 1, 2, 3, 4, however number of candidates. Then you would see vote for town council, and it would say vote for 4. I'm just recollecting how it normally would
right.
say. Today, if you did this, what it would do is for the town council, it would have 4-year term, vote for 2, and there would be a list of 2 or more people running for those 4-year terms. And then there would be another column that says 2-year term, vote for 2, and there would be those candidates who were on the ballot for that 2-year term. It doesn't mean separate elections like separate events. It means that on the ballot, they would show up differently. So you would end up going and voting for 3, checking 3 boxes. You would vote for somebody for mayor, you would vote for 2 people for the 4-year terms, and you'd vote for 2 people for the 2-year terms. But it's all one event.
Okay, I get it. Suppose they wanted to vote, they didn't want to vote for the 2 people for the 2-year term. They wanted to put all their votes on the 4-year term people.
It wouldn't work that way. If that's the way we wanted to do it, then we need to go to the approach that's currently in here, which is the highest vote getter. Yeah.
I support the change going for the 2, running for the 2-year or running for the 4-year, but I was just wondering about that possibility.
Yeah. Chris, Klaus, any comment?
I'm with Dan. When this was first brought up, I think moving to 4-year terms for the council and the mayor is important. I think continuity is critical. I don't like the randomness of a few votes determining something that may not be really what the various candidates want. I think we may well have candidates who are very happy to run for a 2-year term, either because they've already done a few and don't want to extend this period for another 4 years, or because they're new and want to see what it feels like. And then there are those who really are committed and want a 4-year term. This gives the opportunity for both. I think this is the right way to go, and I support it.
I concur. I think Dan gave a very good explanation. I have no argument with it. I think it's the proper way to go.
Joe, from a legal standpoint, have I articulated correctly in my answer to Mary Ann how this would work on the ballot?
Yes. I think the main thing is that all the feedback, I reached out to a lot of different sources for feedback on the implementation. And the feedback was that these are both generally acceptable methods. The method in the original ordinance is the one that's used more commonly, but I never got any feedback saying having 2 separate elections, an election for 2-year terms, an election for 4-year terms. Nobody said that was not a correct way to do it. And I even talked to the election commission, and they seem to be okay with it. I mean, that would really be my only concern in all of this, because they've got to, keep track of this. So it sounds good to me.
In the language that you used, Joe, didn't it say 2 elections?
Well, it is, yes. It's not one general election.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just similar to, you know, we have right now, we have two elections. We have an election for mayor and election for town council. This would be an
Right.
election for mayor, an election for the 2-year town council term, and election for the 4-year town council term, but it's still all the same.
I support Dan's recommendation. I go along with that. I just wanted to clarify that. That's all.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask one more question on this? And it's been a couple of years since I picked up a packet from Petra. But do we need to put a cover sheet on the packet for the explanation so that folks who may not have already spoken to you will have a clarification as to what they can run for a 2-year or 4-year term on council to make it more clear?
Yeah, I mean, we would need to make sure that we change the communication that Petra has. I mean, if the council decides to make this change, we would need to communicate it quickly, which we could do in tomorrow's e-blast, and give Petra some language that would handle that. So I am going to leave it to, since obviously I'm not running in the December election. I want to make sure that the current council members that may or may not be candidates for that election are having some ownership around this issue. So I will leave it to frankly to Dan or Klaus or Mary Ann as to whether they would want to offer a motion to amend the language that we have in the first reading to adopt this second method, or this alternative method.
I so move that motion.
We will need to put into order the actual language.
Mhm. Okay,
Dan, you need someone to make the motion and then you can second it. Dan, you want to go ahead and make the
Yeah.
motion?
I'd like to move that we amend the proposed election ordinance that allows us to hold an election for 2 openings for a 2-year term of council and another election for 2 openings of a 4-year term for council for this election only.
One thing, Joe, does he need to include the mayor for 4-year term in his motion?
Yeah, well, I was going to suggest that we use the I prepared some language.
We've got language which we drafted as an alternative to the original language. Do you want that included as part of the motion?
Yes.
Joe,
Okay.
would you go ahead and read that so people
Yeah.
know what it says?
So let's see here. This is section 3. No, I'm sorry. Oh, I found another typo, but section 3 implementation would be changed to read, in order to implement the ordinance in staggered terms, the next election to be held on December 1st, 2020 will elect a mayor for a term of 4 years, comma, 2 council members for a term of 4 years, comma, and 2 council members for a term of 2 years. The 2-year term seats and the 4-year term seats will be separate elections. Persons applying to be a candidate for council member in the next election will designate whether they desire to run for a 2-year or a 4-year term.
All right, that encompasses my proposed amendment then, or change.
Okay. All right. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay. All right. So now we have, so first we need to vote on, we're voting on the amendment. We're voting first on the amendment, correct, Joe?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion for the amendment. We have a second. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
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 All right. Okay, now we'll go back to the actual ordinance itself. So again, for ordinance 2020-08, as amended, we have a motion, we have a second. So with that, do we have any additional discussion with regard to the amendment, to the overall ordinance?
No, Mayor.
Well, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, it passes. Okay, we'll move to new business, and we have again a couple ordinances that we're handling on first reading. The first one is to consider approval of ordinance 2020-10, which is an ordinance for the town of Keel Island, South Carolina, for the purposes of which are to amend Article 14, General Regulations, Chapter 1, Flood Damage Prevention, Section 14-114, basis for establishing the areas of special flood hazard, Section 114-115, definitions in Sections 14-173. If I can go ahead and get a motion and a second, then we can get into discussion and talk about what's involved here. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second?
All right. I'm going to, at this point, and again, this is a first reading. Stephanie, is it you or Bruce who?
Bruce, you can come on. There you go.
Just,
Good afternoon, all.
all right, I'm gonna let Bruce just give us a brief review of this, and then we can discuss the issue. Go ahead, Bruce.
All right, the flood ordinance amendments that are in front of you reflect the new flood maps that become effective January 29th, 2021. The adoption period, I should say the appeal period was quite lengthy. The maps were first made public in 2018 and have now just come full circle for adoption. That being said, we have 3 amendments to consider, and that are the articles that the mayor had just presented. There is a new definition and a new delineation line for these flood maps that is referred to as a limit of moderate wave action, or commonly referred as coastal A zone. And that coastal A zone, or that delineation line, if you will, that's a limit of moderate wave action, runs from basically Haulover Creek down along the Kiowa River, encompassing all properties of the High Dunes area. And I believe it takes a turn to the south again at lot 318, and then encompasses what would be the east side of Ocean Course Golf Course, and circles back around and stops roughly in the vicinity prior to the new cottage locations. Okay. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
And again, I don't remember, Bruce, because this issue has started so long ago. I'm not sure whether it began before most of these council members were on the town council or not, but I think it's some background. I mean, this is actually, it's an important issue in that it does affect, I'm not just, people's potential FEMA coverage or insurance maps or flood maps, but it impacts, where properties are impacted by different building codes and so on. But this started actually a couple years ago as these maps were being redrawn. Initially, not only Kiowa, but other coastal communities with the initial maps had some concerns, because in general, the impact, if anything, was to reduce the potential, to indicate that there was less potential impact from flooding, which in light of issues like sea level rise and others would seem contrary to that. As a part of that, there was a couple-year very extensive period of review of these lines. There were opportunities for property owners to appeal the lines, and that did occur in some instances. And all of those, Bruce, all of those have been resolved, I believe.
That's, all the appeals have been resolved and.
Right. So this has been going on for several years. And so what's happened here is we're really at the end of that period. All of that work has occurred. All of those appeals have been resolved. The county is now adopting these maps. And so at this point, what we're doing is now adopting them and substituting them at the beginning of the year into our building codes or into our planning code. So it's an issue that has been, dealt with. It's been around for a couple of years and is really now just coming to fruition. Do I have any questions of Bruce? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a couple. This came up, the first time I heard about this was about 3.5 years ago.
Yeah.
At that point, there was some discussion amongst council that we might want to make a move through an ordinance or some other action so that none of the flood, I'm not quite sure I know the terminology, but the lowest level of the house
Freeboard.
freeboard would not be able to be lowered based on these maps. Is that an issue, or based on the revisions that they've had over the last 3 years, has that issue kind of gone away?
The issue hasn't really gone away, Chris. There is some concern in regards to sea level rise and how other communities have looked at this. The city of Charleston, you probably saw it in the paper just recently, that they've gone to a 2-foot freeboard requirement in lieu of these maps.
And let me interrupt. When you say a 2-foot freeboard requirement, you mean that they want to take the freeboard requirement 2 feet above the map requirement? Is that correct?
Right. So your freeboard requirement, let's for hypothetical. Let's say your property is an AE 14 with a base flood elevation. That base flood elevation under our current ordinance would require a 1-foot freeboard, meaning that the minimum elevation you could build your habitable first floor to would be at an elevation of 15 above mean sea level. Most jurisdictions have looked at this. Charleston County's had a 2-foot freeboard for some time now, for years. Town of Edisto's just gone to a 3-foot freeboard in lieu of the maps. So they're looking at raising, these other communities are looking at raising their freeboard to kind of offset some of the elevation changes shown in the current flood maps. For our island, they range in an elevation as low as far as changes go, from 1 foot as high as 5 foot. Some V zones are changing to AE zones. And so it's kind of across the board. The Freshfields area has gone from an AE type base flood zone to an X zone, which means they're now under, instead of a 1% annual chance over 100 years, it is now over 2% chance over 500 years. So there's been some drastic changes on the island in regards to what elevations we're going to be seeing built with future homes. And then you start thinking about, well, the other side of the coin is, well, we got the sea level rise that people keep talking about. Are we really moving in the right direction? And that's a pretty strong debate.
Yeah, I mean, some of and we talked about it, you're correct, Chris, on the discussions, because the concern was, and I think what you're seeing in some other communities is if we went, if we have an area that went from an AE 12 down to AE 10 or something, the concern was, well, do we really trust the direction that the maps have gone? And since the maps we don't control, do you essentially deal with that by simply adding another foot and making a 2-foot freeboard instead of 1 to try to get back up to where you were? Because Bruce, in the new maps, we didn't, as I recall, we did not have any part of the island that resulted in a higher everything went down from 12 to 10 or 10 to, but nothing went up.
That is correct. Everything has been
Yeah.
decreased as
And-
far as elevations are concerned.
And by adopting this, it does not erase the potential for a future town council, separate and apart from having adopted today these maps in the code, to reviewing and deciding at a future time to actually deal with the freeboard issue. I mean, it's always possible that a future town council could turn around and decide to look at the freeboard issue, and there, I can assure you there will be a lot of discussion should that ever occur.
Yeah, I mean, any council can at any time decide to attempt to increase freeboard if they so desire.
Bruce, again, 3.5 years ago, you were pretty animated in your recommendations that we move the freeboard up in comparison to what we felt were the new maps coming out. Is that still your opinion, or have you adjusted your view based on some evidence that I'm just not aware of?
It is still my professional opinion that that we need to take a hard look at the freeboard area. But in hindsight, and looking at some other data, increasing freeboard is just a small, well, I shouldn't say small, it's just another piece of the pie as far as having a resilient community. I mean, there's infrastructure that needs to be looked at, and there's all kinds of, water runoff off of properties onto roadways. All those things need to be considered when you start talking about flooding issues, whether it's storm related or sea level rise related. And freeboard just happens to be one of those items.
And I would not be surprised if this is an issue that the council at some point in the future is going to want to, or going to need to take a look at.
Yeah, and I'm raising it here because, I think 3 of the members of the council will in some way at least attempt to extend their service to the community in the next year. And I think, this probably deserves more discussion than we're having on it today, especially in light of the sea level rise report, in which we talk about using resiliency as a competitive advantage for the island vis-a-vis our peer communities. So I don't think we should simply gloss over it. I think it's something that the next council needs to give some thought to, perhaps in their strategic review in January.
I agree with Chris. It does need to, more meetings need to take place and discuss it in more detail. And possibly at the strategic meeting would be the place to have those types of discussions.
And if I can just add, Chris, Bruce and I did talk about that, placing it on the agenda in January. One thing, Bruce, so I understand that even though the elevations will drop based on the new adopted maps, we still will have in place our, is it 1 foot or 1.5 foot freeboard?
We have a 1 foot freeboard.
We're at 1.
We're at 1, so that will still remain in place, correct?
Yeah. Yes, it would.
Yeah, so we have a 1 foot, and they've gone down in many cases 2. So the practical experience of that is that we've lost a foot basically in terms of height. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that I and everyone else understand it in layman's terms.
We also have some zones that have gone from V to AE. So this is the kind of issue, and Chris, I agree it's an important issue, and it is the kind of issue that I would say for a future council would be worthy of a workshop. It's really one that you need to probably schedule a workshop, because you've really got to get back and pull out the maps and really get a sense for the island and how it varies in terms of what the maps do, the differences between V zones and AEs. But it is, that's why I wanted to point out, it is an important issue, because it's important. It's not only important to property owners in terms of new development and what they have to do in terms of building homes, the underlying construction methods and so on, but as redevelopment, and I think Bruce has made this argument vehemently, that as Kiowa in parts of the island move more and more from new development to redevelopment, and you have a lot of homes that have been historically down at lower levels, making sure that we find the right balance between being able to ensure that we're rebuilding homes at a level that makes sense in terms of future flooding, and at the same time are also able to balance that with being able to make it not uneconomical for people. You know, you want people to rebuild and renovate and upkeep their properties. And to some extent, these two things can work against each other. So you want to make sure that you're really thinking this through, because you absolutely want to make sure that you're protecting the island and residents against future flooding. But it can have a big impact on somebody trying to remodel. You agree, Bruce?
Yes, Mayor, I do agree. There has to be some, what I would refer to as middle ground for the existing homes.
Yeah. Chris, those are good points that I think the council does need to think about in the future. Any other comments?
I found this to be a very complex question when we raised it, and I just don't want it to get glossed over. And I'm hoping that the three other council members today digest the fact that this is an issue that needs some attention starting early next year.
Other comments or discussion?
No, thank you, Chris. So, Mr. Mayor, what we're doing today is adopting the new flood maps, basically.
What we're doing today is adopting the flood map. So what has already been done, which is kind of awkward, is that the kinds of some of the issues we're talking about are the flood maps, the right flood maps. Do we agree with what they designate? All of that has already occurred over the last couple of years. So that's kind of work that's already happened. So I think, as Chris and Bruce have both indicated, that the issue in the future is, with these flood maps in place, what implications does that have for other aspects of our building codes, such as the freeboard and so on, which is I think you're right, an important future issue. All right, we have a motion, a second, no other discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. And again, this was a first reading, so the second reading of this will occur at the second meeting. And since maybe we have whet your interest on the underlying issues here, I'm sure that if any of you would like to dig into this, the background a little deeper between now and second reading, Bruce will be more than happy to do that, and he can show you a lot of maps. All right, let's move to item B, which is to consider approval of ordinance 2020-11. This is also a first reading. An ordinance to amend Article 15, General Offenses, Chapter 2, Offenses Against Public Peace, Section 15-212, Littering. I'm going to let Stephanie handle this item, except that I want to emphasize here, because I know people react as soon as we pass an ordinance. Are we inventing some new rules? This is a change to language to an existing ordinance, and it is specifically driven by the really major issues we are starting to have on this island with respect to the amount of trash that we have, and issues that we have been suffering for a long time at Sora Rail, our facility there particularly. Where we continually have problems with people throwing trash all over the place, making it, there's potentially a public health issue, and it's chronic. We have been very aggressive in trying to police it. We have cameras, we have postings, but regardless of whatever we do, there just seems to be a propensity to want to pile trash everywhere. And so this is related to advice and efforts that we have to try to align our ordinances and the language in our ordinances so that we can better enforce and be successful in our municipal court. So I'll let some combination of Joe and Stephanie discuss the specifics of this.
I will go ahead and let Joe, he made the changes. So I'll let you go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, these changes are, as much as anything, from my point of view, a reaction to some issues that have arisen in the municipal court, the prosecution of our littering ordinance, particularly at the waste site, where apparently a lot of people are failing to put their garbage in the receptacles there.
Right.
So I'll say the two main drivers here are, number one, making clear that if in checking the waste that's been improperly disposed of, we look and for envelopes, address labels and whatnot, we can trace that back to where they came from. So this change, and it's in subsection E, simply says that when that occurs, when our ordinance, when our code enforcement officer discovers a letter or an address label in there, that it creates what's called a rebuttable presumption that that person has violated this ordinance. And I want to make clear that this is language from a model code that's been suggested for municipalities all over the country. So it's not unusual. That just means that there's a presumption that the litter came from that person. Perhaps that person can rebut that presumption. They can present evidence that someone broke into my garbage can and put it there, something like that. The other big I don't want to call it a big change, because I feel like it was still in there, but so in some ways it's a clarification. In subsection F, we're clarifying that any person who causes, directs, or directs or advises a third party to take their litter and place it in violation of this ordinance, that person can be held responsible. And again, I kind of feel like that was in our ordinance, but this is just clarifying that, you know, you're not off the hook if you send your husband to go dump this stuff. The rest of the changes are really, because I did have a model code in front of me. So I just did some adjustments based on that model code that was in front of me. Again, I think they're really more clarifications, just that, you know, you can't put anything anywhere except in an authorized receptacle. You got to put it in there in a manner where it's not going to get blown out of the receptacle. Let's see. Got a little bit more expansive definition of what litter is. So I don't view these as huge changes. They're really what I would call procedural changes on how we deal with these issues in the municipal court and making things a little more straightforward. But, you know, there's clarity too, so people can't say, well, my son did this, you know. That's something that was happening. So that is the purpose behind this.
And again, I would, you know, stress it's only one of a number of things that we are trying to do to get our arms around this facility, and it is very much, from my perspective, very much a problem with behavior. There clearly are times when the facility is full, but we got to remember that we have two other facilities that, Sora Rail is not the only town disposal facility. We have a facility behind the Kika administrative offices, and then we have our facility here at the municipal center. There is signage at Sora Rail all over that says if Sora Rail is full, here's where the other two locations are. So, it's not a situation where all three locations are absolutely full and people have no other place to go. A lot of it is just frankly wanton throwing of stuff on the ground. And it's particularly being impacted by, in some cases, the growth of the island. I mean, there just frankly are a lot of people. We spent time trying to figure out, or I've spent more time at Sora Rail than I want to, trying to figure out what people are doing. And you've got a lot of things. You've got that facility gets a lot of demand. You have our part-time owners who, when they're leaving to go back to New York or Pennsylvania or whatever, they usually need to dump their stuff someplace because they can't just put their can out because nobody will be here to take it back. But we have renters, we do know that we have some number of rental managers or cleaners or whatever who are using Sora Rail, and not just Sora Rail, but they're using Villa dumpsters as places to dump all the rental stuff. We are going to add, Stephanie, I believe we're going to add more cameras or reposition the cameras there so we can get better viewing.
We have already added the additional camera.
People have figured out where the cameras are, so now they've learned how to block the camera and make sure to park the car in the right way so we can't, get the license plate. It's a never-ending issue, but it is a public safety problem. It's not fair to residents who try to go up there and use it, that they have to either drive away or wade through all kinds of stuff that's unbelievable. So this is only one of a number of things we need to do up there that we're trying to handle. So let me go ahead and get this. Do I have a motion to approve?
Craig, sorry, can I just ask a question just as a matter of interest? How many, over the past whatever period of time, how many tickets have we actually written?
I don't have, Stephanie may know.
I'm not looking for an exact number, but I mean, are we active in actually sanctioning?
Yes.
Yes, when we can identify, for example, by license plate or whatever, when we can identify on the camera, or we're able to identify from the debris, then yes. Stephanie, would you agree that we're aggressive in tracking down and issuing penalties?
Yes.
I can only support what the mayor says, that this is such a problem. Some of you may not be familiar with it. In addition to their garbage, when I've been over there have been ceiling fans, building supplies, broken lumber, strollers, chairs, etc. People just use it like a dump.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So let me remember. Do I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any further questions, comments, discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me. All right. So ordinance 2020-11 is approved on first reading. The third item is the way this is written is to consider approval of the HRNA Kiawah Island Housing Market Study. I'll make a couple comments to position this item, and then also I want to certainly invite both Chris and or Stephanie, who have been the real drivers over the last 6 or 8 months of this study. But obviously we all had a conference, a Zoom call last week, Wednesday, to review with HRNA the actual report content. I thought we had a good discussion. I don't know if any of you tuned in yesterday, but as you know, we invited comment from the comments and questions from the broader resident property owner population. Following that, we didn't get many, but we got some, and we got some. I thought all of them were good questions or good comments. HRNA conducted yesterday a Zoom meeting, or an online meeting, I should say, that had some, because of the limitations in the technology, some live participants that could actually engage and ask questions and talk with HRNA. And then also the ability for other residents or property owners to view and listen via our YouTube channel. So those residents that were kind of live in the call were sort of proxies for the broader population. And they certainly, I thought they had I listened to all of it. Chris and Stephanie both participated live on the call. I thought they had a very good discussion. It was lively. It went for, I think we allotted 2 hours, and they went for the whole 2 hours plus a few minutes beyond that. I think what we're asking to do here at this point is to simply ask the council at this point if we, for any additional comment, and also at this point, I think it would be good, and what I would ask for is if we could, as an outgrowth of this conversation, have a vote by the council to accept the HRNA proposal. This obviously is something that is the beginning of a lot of future discussion. So I think it's important that for anybody that might be listening to this call, by approving the report, we're not in any way suggesting that at this point that means that we the town council or any other entity that is a party to it, the resort or the developers or Kika, is by definition agreeing that we now are going to adopt and implement every point or every recommendation that is suggested in the report. I used this analogy last week in our call to the Sea Level Rise report, where we adopted that report, we endorsed it, and we have used that, we and Kika and others have used that report as the starting off point and foundation for a whole lot of discussion and work following that around what are our priorities, how do we pursue issues, what are things that we need to do. And I certainly consider this the same. I think from my own perspective that HRA has done a very good job in capturing some of both pulling together some of the important data and information around the community's housing market, of highlighting some of the future issues that we may have to deal with, some which are near term and some which are very long term, and pointing us in some different directions. By no means do I necessarily agree with every recommendation, in some cases as being feasible or being appropriate or being of immediate urgency. But I think it's the foundation of a lot of future activity. The way I would see this going forward is again not unlike Sea Level Rise. Chris and I have a meeting scheduled a week from Friday with the Kika board, where we are going to review they've seen this report, like anybody else, but we're going to review it with them and get a dialogue going with them around the intent and answer their questions about it. I envision us doing the same thing with the resort and with the developer, and I would envision us having future communications with our residents to talk about various aspects of this. So again, I see it as the starting point of discussions, but I don't see that we're at the same time necessarily by endorsing it, adopting today every comment or every piece of data or every recommendation. Chris, Stephanie, let me ask you both to comment.
Yeah, I would echo the comments. First of all, on the agenda, what we've written is to consider approval, and I would change that. And it was really the recommendation of one of the residents on yesterday's call, Andy Capelli, to change the word to accept. And accept simply means that I think they've planted a very valuable stake in the ground for a strategic discussion that goes forward from here. And as much like this sea level rise, it's going to be an ongoing discussion, and this report will be as valuable as the next mayor and town council want to make it. So I would hope that they follow some of the recommendations, one of the most important being quarterly meetings in conjunction with some of the other stakeholders on this island, so that they can continually review the issues that this report and naturally all of our residents recognize in terms of the value of Kiowa's brand and property values and all the things that make Kiowa as special as it is. So I certainly would thank HRNA. Stephen's on this call if anyone has any questions for him. I think they did a very good job of data analysis and collection. I think they came up with a credible set of recommendations. Much like the mayor, I don't agree with everyone, but if we all agreed with them all, you wouldn't need anyone but one person. So I think they've certainly started an interesting debate, and I hope it continues beyond this meeting or this body. So Stephen, to you and your team, I think you did a very good job. Thank you.
And only thing I would like to add, I think the mayor and Chris summed it up nicely. I would just like to thank Stephen for Stephen with HRNA, Stephen Phillip, Keely, and Mary. They all did a great job. Again, Stephen is on the call. So if any of you have any additional questions since the last presentation, please feel free to ask. He can turn his video on and answer the questions. That's all I have.
Anybody have any questions of Stephen while he's here?
I don't have a question. I will say I found it to be, I wasn't involved in its development, but I found it from a reading point of view to be very good and comprehensive, especially as related to comparing this community with similar communities. That's data we really didn't have much of before, number one. And I think to Craig's point, the next council, the next mayor, in order for this to be quite useful, we're going to have to break it apart into bite-sized pieces and decide which ones deserve a high priority and in what order we take them on, and then figure out what are the tangible changes we can make, some of which are pretty obvious and some of which are called for in Stephen's study, and some of which we may only find as we have a dialogue with our partners. So it's a good start.
If I was to sort of lay out what I think what I would certainly want to accomplish on this, I guess, over the next 3 months before I'm done, because I agree. I think the next council now really has to pick this up and take it and run with it. What I envision over the next couple months is really to make sure that what we've done is make sure that the different parts of the community really get a chance to understand what's here. And I'll break that into a couple things. Like I said, we need to sit down with the community association and really engage them, make sure that they, because in some cases they have new board members that were not in place when we actually talked last fall about doing this, is to really work with them to make sure they understand what's here and how they might want to use this as a tool. I certainly want to engage some of the other major entities like the resort and Kiowa Partners. But I also envision before the end of the next couple months, wanting to try to communicate a a little more to our property owners about the study. I mean, at the end of the day, let's recognize this is what, Stephen, 156 slides. I mean, there's a lot of material here. It's great material, but there's a ton of it. And I think in some cases we need to try to take a first shot at synthesizing for people what we think are some of the key takeaways and the most important points here. And then I would really hope that that following the December elections, that the new mayor and council would pick this up along with a number of other things as part of some of their initial planning and strategic planning for the new council, to begin to think about how this fits into the next year and going forward. I do think, if I can just go back to the most important thing I get out of this. When we did this a year ago, I think when the whole concept of this came up a little less than a year ago, it was motivated again by the dialogue that we were hearing in the community that suggested that there was a lot of concern about the strength of Kiowa's housing market. And necessarily, I think people weighed that against their own experiences, and depending upon when they got in the market and when they got out of the market over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, people have experienced very different experiences with the value of their properties. And I think there was a lot of concern about, well, is Kiowa, are we still a strong community competitively, and are we performing well? And I think that I hope that what people take away from this is that the answer is yes, that everything this analysis says is that today we continue to be a strong community, that we have a very, very strong regional and national reputation, that we have we have fundamentally a strong real estate market, recognizing that we have suffered all of the ups and downs that the national and other markets have had over the last 15 years. But I think the other big issue here or finding is that as strong as we are, you won't just stay that way by standing in place, and that the community is going to have to focus on investment and redevelopment and staying and not getting stale, but staying a fresh, vibrant community. And that's going to take work. It's not going to happen just by sitting still. So those were my takeaways from this, and I think they did a good job with it. Any other thoughts or questions of Stephen, or other comments? So I guess Stephanie, I don't know what I don't think we need a resolution, or do we need but I guess what I would ask is whether we have council concurrence with formally adopting the HRNA Kiowa Island Housing Market Study. And Stephanie, should I just get that by a vote or by just a individual show of support?
I would like for it by vote, so it's in the record. So as we're moving forward with this, we have record showing that council supported and accepted the report as presented. All
right, so I'm gonna try it this way, which is that what I would ask by vote is for a council showing of support, and that in entering into the minutes that the town council formally adopts the HRNA Kiowa Island Housing Market Study. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Stephanie, will that accommodate what we need?
Yes, thank you.
All right. With that, I will turn to the town administrator. Oh, I do want to add one other thing. When I went through I had all my notes for things I wanted to talk about at the beginning. I missed one important note I had on the side. Jim Jordan, this is his 20-year anniversary.
Wow.
And so with the town, although I'm told he had, what, 5 years, Stephanie? 4 or 5 years prior to being an official employee. So he's actually gone over the 20. But Jim just had his 20 years. And I think that does right now make him our longest. Now that Rusty's gone, is Jim now our longest standing employee?
Yes, since Rusty is gone, that's correct.
Since Rusty's gone, he's the senior person. So I did want to point that out and thank Jim for his, both congratulate him on his 20 years and thank him for his both ongoing and continued contribution to the town. So I did miss that earlier and wanted to point it out. Town administrators report, Stephanie.
The only thing I wanted to do is just update you all on the Parkway project. So with regards to the right turn lane and the bike path, we are still working on just making some, or I guess doing some finishing touches on that. Banks Construction is doing as-built. So to kind of step back, there was some discussion with regards to where the new right turn lane, that driveway intersects the bike path. And we just wanted to make sure that the slope was constructed per the engineer designs. So our contract required as-built after they were completed. And so they have completed the as-built. Our engineer, McCormick Engineers, are reviewing that. As long as everything checks out, we can finally close out the repaving project. So that's kind of the status on that. The landscaping project, they're scheduled to get started on that at the end of this month. And the acquisition of additional easement or right-of-way from the Hallover Group, which is the resort, behind the new bike path. We had it surveyed. We're waiting to finalize that because we want to make sure, based on the as-built drawings, that we don't need to change anything before they finalize the survey. So that's where we stand on basically kind of all three projects there around the right turn lanes. Any questions?
Stefan, let me just add too, I know there's been some discussion with our Public Works Committee, and I think even some of us have discussed where we have the new bike path lane next to the new turn lane. Visually, it looks close to the road, although frankly, it's farther from the active road than probably anywhere else along the parkway. Because it's raised and it visually looks close, we want to make sure that it both is safe and also feels safe. So as part of the landscaping plan, that's going to be dealt with. I think, Stephanie, we're going to probably do some combination of hedging and fencing in there to make sure that there's a separation there's about probably 50 or 60 feet where we want to make sure that there's an actual structural separation between the bike path and the turn lane, so that there's so that it is both visually safe as well as by code safe. Is that?
That's correct. The McCormick Taylor did look at that with regards to the bike path. Right now, it appears that it's designed based on the drawings and based on AASHTO requirements. But we are looking at adding some additional things there to make it feel, safer. So we had OSD who actually designed our landscape for the parkway. We met with them. Brian actually and Jim Jordan met with them about a week ago, and they looked at that area specifically. So they've come up with some ideas to add some additional barrier safety there in that section of the bike path.
Okay.
And that's all the updates that I have now, unless anyone has any specific questions for me.
All right. Any questions for Stephanie?
Yes, actually. Stephanie, with the given how incredibly active the rental market has been during this COVID time, have we seen a meaningful uptick in permits issued?
I don't think that we've seen a substantial uptick in short-term rental business license you're talking about issued.
Correct.
No, we have not seen a significant amount. Well, yes, we've seen there's people that's dropped off and people have added on, but I would not say that we've seen a significant increase.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments or questions?
All right, we'll then go to council member updates, and I'll go around my screen here. So Mary Ann?
Thank you, Mayor. For public safety, the Deputy Bike Patrol Program implementation has been delayed due to unavailability of appropriate bicycles. Evidently, the bike companies have sold out due to coronavirus and people's increased physical fitness. So unfortunately, we have to wait to implement this program. However, the deputies are going to move forward with their training. They have to go to the Aviation Authority for that. And hopefully they'll be able to use they'll loan the trainees their bikes. So that
Is
was
it fair to say,
disappointing.
Mary Ann, probably every bike in the country is already on this island, so.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
They have,
I
Marianne,
was-
Marianne, do they have to go to the Aviation Authority? Do these bicycles fly as well?
No, not yet.
Oh.
Maybe next year. Maybe when Kika improves the bike pass, which they said they're going to do, we'll be able to get them to fly.
Good.
That does reminds me of another issue that Kika was talking about, and that's the electric bicycles. They're delaying a decision on that because they've realized, I guess they've gotten a lot of input, that the bike pass really needs some work. So by the October meeting, they will have a program to address the needs of the bike pass. They're really in bad shape. The other thing I wanted to mention was the striping, and Stephanie's already referred to that. I know that the additional striping along the sidewalk has been added, which hopefully will encourage cyclists to stop at stop signs. Has the word stop been entered yet, Stephanie?
I have to double check on that because last I looked at a couple weeks ago, I noticed it was not added when they went through
Okay.
final striping. And so I asked Brian to look into it, and I just actually have to follow up with him because I don't recall seeing.
Yeah,
It-
I haven't either. I haven't checked this week though, but
And I
they
know-
have a stencil.
Yeah, and
So-
I know Banks was going to do it. So when I talked with him, I think he was going to see if Gary Outer or someone else can go ahead and put it in for us.
Good, thank you. And I hope that this will help our Cacique friends
Yeah.
who wanted
Thank you.
additional notification on safety issues and bikes. Because as we know, cyclists do not stop at stop signs necessarily. And that concludes my report for public safety.
All right, thanks, Mary Ann. Chris?
Yeah, I'd like to take the occasion to thank each of the entities who participated in the HRNA call. Not the call, but the entire project. We had folks from Kika, Diana Mezzanot and Jimmy Bailey participated. From the partners, Chris Randolph and Diana Permar. Roger from the golf resort. Acres Ellis, Steve Ellis provided some valuable input, as did Pam Harrington. I'd like to thank all the residents who participated, and we had a very robust participation from residents, both in questions, in a series of focus groups, and then on the phone call or the Zoom call that we had yesterday. And finally, I'd like to give a special shout out to Stephanie Tillison, who herded the cats during this last 6 or 7 months and really did a very valuable job of pulling this thing together with the folks at HRNA. So thank you. That's all I have.
All right, Klaus?
Nothing other than to apologize for my walkabout just now, but it was either walkabout and plug in or disappear off the screen. So I went walkabout.
Your battery going dead?
Yep, but it's now I'm plugged in, so we're good.
And welcome back to Kiowa, to the heat and humidity.
Yeah, it's nice and cool. It's perfect.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, in your package today, you've got a copy of the annual report for the Arts Council, which I want to highlight for you. This is the 2019-2020 season. We operate the Arts Council like we do the fiscal year for the town of Kiowa. So it's from basically the end of June to the end of June every year. Gary Rice, as all of you know, chairs the Art Council, does a great job. Last year, which ended in sort of June of this year, there were 34 events attended by almost 1,200 people. Most of them were musical events, but there were 4 art films, a ballet, and a dance band. I guess a dance band doesn't qualify as music, but I always thought it did. Anyway, as you would expect, this year, the current upcoming year is going to be very different, the one we're into now. We have basically canceled the first half of the season. That would have been all the events taking place from July now through December of this year. The council is working on events that would begin potentially in January, but all very dependent on what happens to the health and welfare of the town and its residents and guests based on the COVID virus, obviously. We're going to have a smaller budget, as you would expect, because the town has a smaller budget, and also because since all of our events involve getting a large number of people together, many of whom are in high-risk groups, we're not going to be able to do that for a while. So everything's a little bit on hold, but we are doing a lot of planning, and the council itself has done a great job. And I know all the residents miss going, but understand why we're not having these events at this time. Lastly, on behalf of the council, I want to thank Stephanie Edgerton as well as Keely Laughlin on their work, because without their help, the council would struggle getting all of its job done. So thanks to all of them. It was a good season last year. We hope we can get going in January. Thanks, everybody. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
And Dan, I in looking through the report, you know, I also absolutely have to thank all of the Arts Council members. You know, when you look through this, I think one of the, even though they got in a lot of last year's season, I don't know that people recognize how hard that group works and how many hours they put into planning, finding artists, all of the backroom work that's involved in putting on a performance. And then to have, you know, so much of the season, both last season and this season, impacted. You know, when you think about the community, it's kind of seemed very different not having these events. You think about when you see other residents, so often it's at Arts Council events, and that piece of it has kind of dropped away. So hopefully we'll get to a point where we can do this again. I'm guessing one of the challenges is going to be, since we are reliant on external venues, even if at some point the Arts Council in the town says, well, we're okay with moving forward, we're still sort of at the mercy of the venues and whether they are going to be comfortable having them used for large groups. So
you're right. Each of those venues have very strict requirements right now on, if, for example, if it's a church and they're having services, you know, it may be every third row and they're limited to a percentage of their normal audience of maybe 25%. So there's a lot of restrictions already, and that's for what they consider to be critical events. Our events would be in a different category. So yeah, all of that's up for grabs. We are very dependent, as you know, on our host venues, because we don't own a venue that would take care of really any of our events. So we're very reliant on them, and they've been great partners. So you're right, it'll be a challenge for us, but the group is very hard at work, and they do a great job. And you're right, the town residents love it. They do.
yeah, it's been kind of clear the absence of those events, which otherwise would be starting up right now. So, all right, any other comments? Otherwise,
Mayor,
yes.
Mayor, I just have 2 comments. I would be remiss if I did not point out the great job that Stephanie and Dorota did with Budget at a Glance. If you all have an opportunity, it's part of your packet. We put that out in the lobby as well as on our website. We actually get great reviews on that. I think it's an easy way for residents to just kind of quickly see what we do and how we spend our money. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. If you need copies to hand out to your friends at dinner parties, please feel free to reach out to Stephanie. She can give you a few to take with you. Also, Marianne, Brian did respond back to me that stop is etched on all the intersections on the Parkway, so that is completed.
Very good. Thank
That's
you
all.
very much.
Yeah, the budget at a glance, if you haven't looked at it, is very, very well done. I think they've particularly gotten it down, to a design that is very understandable and easy to capture the critical numbers. So I thought they did a good job with that. We do not send that out, Stephanie. That's just something people can only pick up if they're here. Your turn.
I do think that she's going to put it probably as part of the e-blast. So I don't think we actually mail it out like we do town notes, but Stephanie, can you please confirm that?
That's correct. So it will be distributed via e-blast and also posted on our transparency page, which is under the governance tab on the website.
Is it too thick to fit into fourth quarter town notes?
I think we would have to whittle it down to maybe a few pages that you might want to feature.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we can look at that for sure.
All right. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.